Today's character showcase is dedicated to Vic Mignogna and his fight for fair treatment and due process in the workplace. To show your support for Vic and the fight that he's taking to those who try to silence him, use the hashtag #IStandWithVic and let it be known here and now that I too stand with Vic. Broly, the Legendary Super Saiyan. Of all the non-canon antagonists from the Dragon Ball Z film universe, Broly is arguably the most popular of them all. Introduced in 1993 in the Dragon Ball Z film of the same name, Broly has endured as one of the most popular and powerful enemies that the Z fighters ever faced, with his film slotted somewhere near the end of the Cell Saga, as evidenced by the fact that it features the original future Trunks and Super Saiyan Team Gohan. Of course, as mentioned earlier, Broly is a non-canon character, so even though his film was slotted around that time for the show, that doesn't mean that anything that happened in the film had any impact on the show, and in fact, ultimately that was the case. This would further remain the case over the course of the next two films in the trilogy, Broly Second Coming and Bio Broly. This film trilogy, called the Broly Triple Threat, would be the only way in which fans of Broly would ever actually get to see the character portrayed for a very long time, and none of them were considered to be in-canon portrayals. That is to say, none of these stories actually impacted the story of the show itself. None of them had a lasting impact on the characters, nor was it ever referenced outside of the film universe. However, in December of 2017, fans learned that this was all about to change with the announcement of a Dragon Ball Super movie, one that was going to be in canon with the rest of the Dragon Ball Super series that preceded Dragon Ball Z. As information trickled out over the coming months, it was soon revealed who the antagonist of the movie was going to be. None other than a reimagined version of the legendary Super Saiyan himself, Broly. And that's what we're going to look at in this video today. We will explore where Broly started in the non-canon universe as the legendary Super Saiyan, and see what he became when Akira Toriyama himself reimagined the character for his long-desired canonical introduction to the Dragon Ball universe. And it is in that spirit, friends and gamers of all stripes, that I invite you to join me on today's character showcase, where we will examine how the reimagining of a character can really provide you with some new inspiration on how to approach them going forward. And so, friends and gamers of all stripes, let us not waste any more time as we look into the reimagining of Broly. In order for us to fully understand Broly's reimagining, we first have to understand where he began as a character. And that means we need to take a look at Broly and how he was portrayed in his first movie, Broly the Legendary Super Saiyan. Now, when we are first introduced to Broly, we are done so with him alongside his father, Paragus. And when we meet him, we immediately note that Broly stands out from most Saiyans in the fact that he appears to be rather docile and harmless in his appearance, which is very uncharacteristic of the Saiyan warrior race. This point is further pushed home by the fact that the expression he wears when we first meet him is almost unchanging. He has this look of emptiness and melancholy about him that belies a sensitive soul as opposed to the kind of warrior that one might expect to come from the Saiyans. However, as the film progresses, we begin to learn that this is a situation where appearances are deceiving. Broly's tall and relatively lean build compared to the other Saiyan characters, as well as the melancholic expression he wears, actually belies a nature that is entirely different to the one that one might initially expect. And the reason behind this deception is revealed in flashback as Paragus explains Broly's backstory to Prince Vegeta. And it is in this flashback that we learn not only of Broly's true nature, but of course of why he is the way he is. And unfortunately, it's not the most compelling reason. Broly, as the title of the movie states, is what is known as the Legendary Super Saiyan, which, among the Saiyan race, is a legend of a powerful, almost demonic warrior that brings destruction and wrath wherever he goes. According to the Saiyan people, the Legendary Super Saiyan appears once every 1,000 years, and in this case, it just so happened to be that the most recent Legendary Super Saiyan is Broly. What's more, we learn that the traits of the Legendary Super Saiyan are infused in a person's nature from the very start, from the point that they are born. This is not a choice that Broly made, this is just who Broly is, flat out. And so from this point, we begin to understand that Broly's personality is essentially split, and we learn that it is done so because of the crown that he wears upon his head, which is essentially a mental dampener that was designed by a scientist his father commissioned. For you see, as he began to age, Paragus started to understand that Broly was a lot more dangerous than he'd initially given him credit. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning with Broly's backstory, and that really starts when he was a baby. Broly's biggest tie into the Dragon Ball universe is the relationship that he shares with Goku. For in the movie, it is revealed that Goku and Broly were born on the same day. Not only that, they shared nursing pods in the Saiyan homeworld that were directly next to each other. Now Broly, even as an infant, was incredibly powerful, registering a power level of about 10,000 on the Saiyan Scouters. Anyone who understands the over 9,000 joke from Dragon Ball Z should fully understand why a baby Saiyan having a power level of 10,000 would have been considered absolutely massive. By comparison, baby Goku was said to have a power level of only 2, which is obscenely weak for a Saiyan. He was considered to be one of their lowest class citizens because of how weak he registered on their power readers. Now why do I bring up Broly's power level in all of this? Well, it's because his incredible power shares a relationship with the relationship he has with Goku. See, there were 2 major life-shaping events that happened in Broly's youth that really started him down the path of ultimate destruction that he would find himself on. The first was simply being placed in the nursing pods next to Goku. Goku was an immensely loud child. He was always crying at all hours of the night, almost non-stop. He would wail and whine at everything that happened to him. Unfortunately, Broly was quite the opposite. He was a much more quiet baby that wanted simply to rest and sleep, but Goku's wailing would keep him up for days at a time, developing inside of him a subconscious hatred for his fellow Saiyan. Meanwhile, Broly's father Paragus was dealing with an entirely different problem relating to his son, that of the fear caused by his power level. You see, as it happens, King Vegeta III, the father of the Vegeta we all know, was very fearful of the immense level of power that Broly held, fearful and jealous of the fact that Broly, even as a baby, was much more powerful than his own son. And because of this, he ordered that the baby Saiyan be killed. Paragus, of course, balked at this and wanted to save his son, but King Vegeta would have none of it and attempted to have both of them killed on the spot. But as mentioned, the power of the Legendary Super Saiyan manifested inside of Broly even during infancy, and so when the other Saiyans attempted to kill him and Paragus, he unleashed his power in a blind and uncontrolled rage, he was an infant after all, and managed to accidentally save his father Paragus not only from being murdered by the fellow Saiyans, but from the destruction of planet Vegeta at the hands of Frieza. Continuing forward through the flashbacks, we begin to learn that Broly grew into a wild child that was almost impossible to control. We learn that the wound that Paragus has, the most iconic marking he has, the scar over his eye, was caused by Broly in a fit of rage. We also learn that the first time Paragus attempted to put the restraining crown on Broly's head, Broly very nearly killed him in the process. Once again, giving into the fury and desire for brutal combat that is characteristic of all legendary Super Saiyans. And that right there is the ultimate problem with the way Broly was originally written. You see, Broly ends up ultimately being a character that has no agency of his own. The things he does are not things that he does simply because he wants to do them, they are things that are caused by the nature of the legendary Super Saiyan himself. If baby Goku wasn't in the nursing pod adjacent to baby Broly constantly crying, and if King Vegeta hadn't attempted to kill Broly and his father on that last day of planet Vegeta's existence, it really wouldn't have mattered. Broly would have ended up being the exact same person because it's the nature of the legendary Super Saiyan. Broly's own personality doesn't exist. It's just the legendary Super Saiyan reborn. Which unfortunately means that the only personalities Broly really ends up having are that of the melancholic, restricted youth, which is again something that is done to him as opposed to something he developed himself, and his hatred of Goku when he finally sees Goku for the first time and very nearly loses control on multiple occasions in the movie. And when he does lose control, he turns into a malicious, cruel destroyer of anything in his path, really. And he is so powerful that he is essentially unstoppable until such a point as all of the other characters who have been beaten to hell up until that point, including Paragus, whom Broly then killed, are forced to join forces and essentially donate their remaining power all to Goku so that he can finish the job before the new planet Vegeta that this all takes place on is destroyed by a runaway comet. And so, unfortunately, this means that Broly, for as fun as he is to watch fight, essentially as a character represents many of the things that did not work about the Dragon Ball stories. Characters that are just pure, power-enhanced, brutish meatheads. Broly as a character is quite simply boring in the Legendary Super Saiyan story and the following films, Second Coming and Bio Broly, although in fairness, Bio Broly is essentially nothing like the previous Brolys, and is really much more of a mindless monster than even just a malicious, planet-destroying psychopath. So one might be wondering, how then can you take a character that, as a character, ultimately had so little and reimagine him into something much more interesting? What traits are there that we can use to make the character much richer and more engaging than he has ever been? And now we move on to Broly's reimagining in Dragon Ball Super Broly. And of course, spoiler warning for Dragon Ball Super Broly. I'm not going to get into too much of the details of the movie, but there will be some spoilers, so if you haven't seen it yet and you want to go in unspoiled, stop the video now and go watch the damn movie. Seriously, it's really good. Alright, with that said and out of the way, let's move on. So now that we've established what the problems with the original iteration of Broly was, at least as far as his character is concerned, it's time for us to take a look at Akira Toriyama's own crack at the character and see how he was able to reimagine Broly into someone who is considerably more deep and engaging as a character than the Legendary Super Saiyan version was. And that right there is something that we need to note right off the bat. The original iteration of Broly, while he was designed by Akira Toriyama, was never written by him. None of Broly's previous 3 stories were written by Toriyama himself. He didn't really have a whole lot of involvement with the character until Dragon Ball Super, and the entire reason for that lies almost entirely on the shoulders of the fans. It was the fans that really wanted to see Broly make a comeback in the Dragon Ball universe, and the fans who wanted to have him come back as a canon character. And fortunately for us, that was something that Akira Toriyama's editor took note of, and he suggested to Toriyama that, hey, maybe we should take a look at this character to put him in the next movie. I think the fans would really enjoy that. And fortunately for the fans and the character of Broly himself, Akira Toriyama took his editor's advice. He went back and he watched the original 3 Broly movies, and he decided, you know, there is something there. A few changes need to be made to make this character work, but I can definitely do something with this. And what were these changes? Well, by and large, they were decisions that would give Broly more agency as a character, as opposed to lumping him into the role of Legendary Super Saiyan who does what he does because this is what all Legendary Super Saiyans have done. And just like with the previous incarnation of Broly, the changes for this new Broly start with his childhood. First and foremost, Gon's subconscious hatred of Goku. In fact, Goku isn't even sharing a space anywhere near Broly when they are young. Instead, we find that Broly's nursing pod is directly next to Vegeta's. He is placed in the nursing pods that are sectioned off for the most elite of the elite warriors. And the entire reason why this is done, as it's explained in the film, is because Broly's initial readings were of an incredibly high power level. He had a power level that was almost as high as Vegeta's. From here, things proceed fairly similarly to how they do in the Legendary Super Saiyan flashbacks of Broly's childhood. King Vegeta III becomes very concerned and upset with the fact that Broly is sharing this space with his son, whom he has great pride in. In his jealousy and anger, he demands to know who the child is, and one of the scientists there explains that that is Broly, the son of Paragus. And since Paragus is a lower-ranking warrior, at least in the sense that he's not as elite as the Saiyan royal family, King Vegeta III becomes very upset by this and demands that the scientists use one of their power readers to determine what Broly's power is. This time around, though, his power level reads at less than half of what it was before, and the scientists say that, you know, it must have just been a bug with the scouters. We'll go ahead and remove the child immediately. However, when they attempt to do so, Broly's power spikes again and actually fries the scouting devices that they're using. This causes King Vegeta III's jealousy and worry to flare once again, as he notices that since this boy has so much untapped potential, not only could he make his family line look bad by surpassing Vegeta potentially, but he could also pose an incredible danger to those around him if his power is as uncontrollable as it appears to be. And so it is that King Vegeta III demands that Broly be immediately exiled to the deserted planet of Vampa, a very harsh and dangerous world where the boy will be forced to live out his days on his own, completely separate from the rest of the Saiyan race, and will likely die in the process. Of course, much as was the case in the Legendary Super Saiyan flashbacks, Paragus gets wind of this and goes to plead with King Vegeta not to let this happen. He swears that his son will not prove to be the danger that King Vegeta thinks he will be, but King Vegeta then reveals that the decision was already made, and Broly is already being launched off the planet. And so, in order to save his son, Paragus steals a ship from the Frieza Force and goes after Broly. And it is here that we have our first really important difference between how Broly is portrayed in Legendary Super Saiyan and how he is portrayed in Dragon Ball Super. Broly's father Paragus, at least at the start, cares much more about Broly than he does in the Legendary Super Saiyan. In the Legendary Super Saiyan, Broly was simply a tool that was going to be used to extract revenge against the royal family for the same crimes committed, essentially. Paragus has that same goal here as well, but his concerns first and foremost are with Broly's survival and his own. He wants to be able to raise his son. And because of this, an emotional through line is established that really helps us to connect to Broly on a much deeper level than we've ever been able to before. Now, before we continue on with the rest of Broly's story here, I want to note that while this is happening, we are also getting a B-plot that involves Frieza taking over as the leader of the Saiyans and the leader of the Frieza Force from his father, King Cold. This storyline, which retells the destruction of the Saiyan race and Planet Vegeta at Frieza's hand, and also actually retells the story of Bardock, which is Goku's father, plays an important role in establishing the fact that it is Frieza who is once again going to be a major catalyst for change in the story going forward. Frieza, as he has done in the past, is going to live up to his role as a villain that negatively impacts the people around them and forces change in other characters while remaining unchanging and evil himself. But moving back to Broly. As time moves forward in the film, we see that over the next 40 years, Broly and his father Paragus have managed to survive together on Vampa despite the harsh conditions. And all of this in spite of the fact that when they initially arrived, there was only enough food and water to support Broly, Paragus, and the engineer Beats, who joined them for about 10 days. Of course, Paragus, being a ruthless Saiyan warrior who is solely concerned with his own survival and his son's, doesn't want to worry about a third mouth to feed, and so very early on, he brutally murders Beats by shooting him in the back, thus ensuring their stores early on will last long enough for them to determine whether or not the life forms present on planet Vampa will be enough for them to survive off of going forward. Naturally, that did end up being the case, and so, as mentioned, over the next 40 years, Broly and his father lived in isolation on planet Vampa, training and planning for the day that they could take revenge against the royal family. That day finally comes with the arrival on Vampa of two low-ranking members of the Frieza Force, a pair of talent scouts, so to speak, comprised of the green-skinned young alien woman Chilai and the old yellow-skinned alien man Lemmo. And much like Broly and Paragus were when they first arrived on planet Vampa, Chilai and Lemmo find themselves almost immediately harangued by the wildlife on the planet, these dangerous insect-like creatures that attempt to drink their blood. Very shortly after they are attacked, though, Broly arrives to destroy the beast, along with Paragus, who explains that they've been stranded there for many, many years, waiting for rescue from the Frieza Force. And so it is that Lemmo and Chilai bring Paragus and Broly back to Frieza to claim their reward, a veritable fortune according to them. And it is from this point, thanks in large part to Frieza's machinations, that the wheels of the story finally begin to turn in full. And for the sake of brevity, I'm going to keep the remaining summary very short. Essentially, Frieza is seeking the Dragon Balls for his personal gain once again, and so he already has an excuse to go to Earth, but the arrival of Broly leads him to change his focus back to getting revenge against Vegeta and Goku for the times that they've defeated him in the past. This yearning for revenge is mirrored by Paragus, who still seeks vengeance against the Saiyan royal family for the wrongs committed against him and Broly. And as the journey towards the planet Earth, we begin to see and learn a little bit more about about who Broly is. We learn this mainly through his budding relationship with Chi-Lai and Lemmo, as well as a flashback sequence we get when he tells them a story of an old friend that he had back on Vampa, which also happens to be the story of how he got the pelt that he wears around his waist.
Me and Ba got along well back home. It was scary when it got mad, but I got over that. And I started to train by avoiding Ba's teeth. We became like good friends. My dad didn't like that one bit. He said that being friends with Ba wasn't training but playing. Dad shot Ba's ear off with a gun, making it angry with him. And me. After that, Ba was never the same again. That's why I decided to keep Ba's ear. To remember when we were friends.
As you can see, we are getting more information on Broly than we ever did during his time as the Legendary Super Saiyan, because we are allowed to see the kind of relationships that he has built over the years, not only with the new friends that he has made in Chi-Lai and Lemmo, but with the creatures that lived on the planet Vampa and with his father. We can see how his relationship with his father became strained as his father became more and more obsessed with the idea of using Broly to exact revenge. However, even in spite of this strain, Broly still cares very much for his father, as evidenced by the fact that he chastises Lemmo when Lemmo speaks ill of what Paragus has done to him. Moving forward, Frieza and his forces, who are already on their way to Earth thanks to the 2 scouts they had sent to seek out the Dragon Balls, finally obtaining the final one, finally arrive to confront Goku and Vegeta once again. It is here that the action-heavy meat of the movie begins, and as you can see from what's been playing in the background, it is some damn good action. Without hesitation, Broly, under his father's command, takes the fight immediately to Vegeta, wanting to take revenge in the name of his father. However, as the fight sours and Goku tags in, Paragus begins to see what King Vegeta III meant all along as Broly's power grows higher and higher and his control becomes weaker and weaker. He attempts to use a shock collar that he installed on Broly to bring him back into line, but realizes too late that Chi-Lai has already stolen the control and broken it. So it is that Paragus becomes fearful and mentions that Broly, with his limitless potential, could become a serious danger to them all, and that they should leave before the planet is potentially destroyed. Frieza, however, remains unconcerned, and in fact has his curiosity piqued. He begins to consider how he might get Broly to increase his power even further, and so he thinks back to an event in his past, one of the most notable events from the entire Dragon Ball canon, the time when he murdered Krillin and turned Goku into the Super Saiyan. And looking at Paragus out of the corner of his eye, Frieza figures the same could probably work here as well. So while Broly is distracted, he murders Paragus, and then...
Broly, look! It's such a tragedy! Do you hear this? It's your father! He was killed by a stray energy blast!
And so, once again, Frieza stands responsible for the creation of yet another Super Saiyan. As grief and rage fills Broly's heart and he cries out in anguish and fury over the death of his father, seeking to destroy anything and everything around him. The legendary Super Saiyan is reborn, and this time with an emotional through line that we can connect with. The rest of the movie pretty much finishes off as a gargantuan and spectacular fight sequence, including finishing off with the canonization of yet another Dragon Ball character that previously was relegated only to the films and the non-canon Dragon Ball GT series. I won't reveal who it is here, but suffice it to say, if you're watching the fight going on in the background right now and know anything about Dragon Ball, you've probably already figured out who it is. Nevertheless, before very long, the fight reaches its climax, and at the very last second before his death, Broly is saved and sent back home to planet Vampa with a sneaky wish from the Dragon Balls made by Chilai. We then finish off with Chilai and Lemmo living on the planet Vampa with Broly on their own, before Goku arrives on the planet to give them a little help with the use of some Capsule Corp tools and the promise that he'd like to come back someday to train with Broly and maybe teach him a thing or two about how to better control his power, thus establishing the future potential for yet another life to be positively impacted by Goku's presence. And there we have it, a full look at Toriyama's reimagining of Broly from a split-personality psychopath who had no agency of his own to a complex and enriched character that is considerably more interesting than it ever was in the past. Is it any wonder now, knowing this, that this film ended up being the highest-grossing Dragon Ball film of all time? To my mind, that stands as an expected result. But we're not quite done yet. After all, Character Showcase is not just about dissecting the interesting aspects and changes to different characters. It's also about looking at how we can take these lessons and apply them to our own characters in tabletop games. So let's finish up the video by taking a look at what we can learn from Broly's reimagining and how we might reimagine characters that we may not be entirely satisfied with. Fortunately, this final segment should be pretty short, as the tricks needed to engage in such a reimagining are actually pretty simple and to the point. In fact, there are really only two major aspects at the core of a reimagining like this. However, before we move forward, I do want to emphasize the fact that what we're going to be looking at here is the role-playing aspects of your character, how we might reimagine their personality, their goals, and what have you in order to make them a more fully fleshed out character that we find more satisfying to roleplay. This is not about reworking a character mechanically. That is something that you're going to have to figure out for yourself and alongside your GM with their permission. But I digress. What are the two major things that we need to do when reimagining a character in a roleplay perspective? First and foremost, we need to identify the core elements of our character that do work, the things that we want to carry over, at least in some sense, that form that core bit of their identity. In the case of Broly, it was his childhood, the betrayal that he faced at the hands of King Vegeta, and the way that he was raised to be a tool of revenge. Even in his reimagining, Toriyama kept this core element of Broly's character. Not only this, he used it to further define the kind of character Broly would become, as opposed to using it as just a plot point footnote that would force him to clash with Goku and the other Z-fighters. Once you have determined the core elements of the character that you want to keep, you need to then move on to the elements you want to change. Recall that while the impacts of Broly's childhood and upbringing are largely the same, many of the smaller details have been changed. He's not being raised on the new planet Vegeta. He's not being raised specifically to become a weapon, at least not initially. We are shown that his father's obsession with vengeance is something that grew fiercer over time. And in the flashback about his relationship with the monster Ba, we are shown how that affected his life. These are all changes and expansions made to that core element that were not present in the Legendary Super Saiyan. What's more, we need to start looking at other aspects that can be changed too, such as Broly's relationship with other characters. What kind of things can you establish with the other player characters in your group, or even NPCs in your group, to start expanding on your character? To start finding ways to bring out more of their personality that you were having difficulty finding before. For as nice as the expansion on Broly's backstory is, it's really his relationships that bring forward the kind of person he will become. The relationship he shares with his father, strained as it is, but still loving on Broly's end. The sibling-like relationship that he begins to develop with Chilai, and the almost childlike relationship that he begins to develop with the much older Lemmo. And then, of course, the final hint to the potential relationship that can grow between him and Goku at the end. All of these things were key in helping to redefine the kind of person Broly was. They were paramount in establishing the emotional through line we needed for him to build up as a richer and more engaging character on the whole. And that is what your goal is too. So take a look at the other characters that you've been presented with in your game, be they the other player characters, which I would recommend looking to first and foremost, or even other NPCs. Player characters, though, would be the best way to do that, because if you can build interesting and established relationships with the other PCs in your party, then you can have those lasting impacts continue on throughout the entire course of the game, whereas with an NPC, you run the risk of that NPC disappearing a little more easily. And there you have it. 2 relatively simple steps for figuring out how you can reimagine a character that you might not be entirely satisfied with into a character that you find much more rich and engaging. Of course, Broly's reimagining could not have happened without the influence of multiple people. It took the team that originally wrote the character to establish the meat and bones that Toriyama was able to expand on later on. And the same is going to be somewhat true potentially for you as well, so don't be afraid to get some advice and suggestions from your fellow players and your GMs. All of you are going to be engaging with this character. It just so happens to be that you're the one who's going to engage with it the most, as it is probably your character that is going to be changed. Either way, the steps towards that successful reimagining are the same. You need to identify the core elements that work, and then identify changes that can be made to and around the character in order to bring out the best parts of those core elements. And with that, we have reached the end of our character showcase on Broly and his full reimagining. I would love to know your thoughts on this character and this idea in the comments down below. Do you think that this approach to reimagining a character that you were finding unsatisfying to play on the roleplay side of things can help to bring back some of that satisfaction, or do you think that it's going to require a different method? Whatever your thoughts, let me know in the comments down below. If you liked the video, please feel free to leave it a like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification icon if you'd like to see more, and make sure to open up the description box to follow me on my social media platform. Minds.com in particular is the best way to follow me if you want to get in contact with me directly. And with all of that now said, dear friends and gamers of all stripes, as usual, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and it is my sincere hope that you continue to roll high, roleplay well, and game on.